Welcome to the Longarm University Quilt Studio, and thanks for viewing this brief tutorial on how to use my new curved crosshatch template. This curved crosshatch template has taken me 2 years to develop, and once you see how it works, I know you are going to love this template as much as I do. There are 2 curved edges on this template. This one here that has a more definite curve is what I call the wavy edge. This curve down here is what I call the curved edge. Both edges can be used to create all sorts of wonderful quilting designs. This template is designed to work from a grid system, and because of that, you're seeing all sorts of different lines on the template. Because the template is clear acrylic, if I just put the template down, you will not see any of the lines. For the video, I have taken permanent marker and I have drawn the lines to show where the etched lines are on the template. You do not have to do this to your template. I've made a small table runner with 3 12-inch blocks, and in these 12-inch blocks I'm going to show you some of the basics of working with this curved crosshatch template. Here is my first block I'm going to quilt, and if you notice, I did start by drawing a registration line through the center. A few minutes ago I told you that the template works from a grid system, and the grid should be as accurate as possible. So to make an accurate grid, I like to use the 1-inch stencil grid from Longarm University. This grid is made out of plastic like a hand quilting stencil. And we're going to actually draw these lines that are on the grid so that they go onto the fabric. Working with a stencil like this, the stencil has a tendency to slip and slide. I'm going to show you how to secure your stencil. But before we do that, I want to take my stencil grid and I want to line it up so that one of the vertical lines is on the vertical line that I drew, one of the horizontal lines is on the horizontal line that I drew. I'm going to take straight pins and I'm going to poke them through the plastic all the way so that the head of the pin is up against the fabric and the plastic. And I'm going to put about 4 of them on the grid, making sure it doesn't shift. And there's really no specific place you need to put them as long as they're there. And if you try moving the grid, it really stays secure. Don't worry about these pins because we're not using the machine yet. I'm going to start drawing the grids in. What I like to mark with is the Crayola washable marker. I like to use the fine tip marker, and you can find these markers in just about any store, almost any place in the universe. I do have a more detailed step-by-step free online video class that explains more about the markers, and I will put a link to that class below this video, and that way you can see all the details. Now that everything's in position here, I'm going to take my Crayola washable marker. I'm going to start drawing both my vertical lines and my horizontal lines until all the lines on the grid are transferred to the fabric. I'm going to do that off camera and I will show you what it looks like when I'm finished. Once all my grids were drawn, I remove the grid and we're ready for quilting. Before we start quilting, there's a couple of rules that you need to know before we start working with our template. Rule number 1 is you must have a base unit on your quilting machine at all times when you're working with templates. And your base unit needs to be securely attached. I have a base unit on my machine. It's metal. I'm knocking on it so you can hear that it's there. Always, always, always have a base unit on your machine anytime you're using a template. Working with templates, rule number 2 is turn your template over and put some spray paste on the back. The spray paste makes the back of your template sticky so it does not slip. The back of the template is the area that has the etching on it. And rule number 3, which is probably one of the most important rules, is that where your fingers are, your needle is, and where your needle is, your fingers are. Right now my template is not specifically lined up. I'm just demonstrating this. So if I'm quilting up here, I am not putting my fingers way down here, because if I do that, you can see how the machine can hop over that. The needle can come down on top of your template, break your needle, throw out your timing, crack your template, and possibly bend your needle bar, and you could be actually dead in the water with your machine until you get it fixed. When I'm actually quilting, I move my hand one of 2 ways. My right hand is on the machine, my left hand is on the template, and as I move along, I'm putting pressure against, right now, the front of my hopping foot, so it stays up against the edge of the template. And sometimes as I'm going along, I will creep along with my fingers. Sometimes I might start, say here, stitch along, and then when I start feeling like I'm losing control a little bit, then I can stop, shift my hand, continue my stitching, stop, move my hand, continue my stitching until I'm across the area that I'm stitching. So remember, you always want to keep your fingers near your needle on the template, but holding down hard enough so that the template doesn't move, but not so hard that the machine doesn't move. Remember those 3 rules. And I'm just going to go over them real quick. Rule number 1, a base unit on your machine at all times when you're working with templates. Rule number 2, spray based on the back. Rule number 3, where your fingers are, your needle is. Where your needle is, your fingers are. I am way up at the top of my block. This is my middle line, and you can see my other registration lines that I've drawn. I am going to be quilting along the curved edge, which has that gentle curve, and in this block I'm going to be doing what I call traditional curve cross hatching. So to start, on my template, I want to find my line number 1 or my center line, which is right here. I have a fairly close view, so you can't see the writing on here, but trust me, this says curved edge. This is center line. When I drew my lines on my fabric, I used a different color for my center line, so all I have to remember is to keep line number 1, the center line, lined up to this green line. Also notice that I have my horizontal lines right here. So I have my center vertical line, I have a horizontal line. This line here, I want to line up along this first line right here. So this would be my line number 1. That's my first dark line on my template. I'm going to line that up so that the lines on the template are actually covering the drawn lines. And the way how my template is positioned right now, you cannot see any of the drawn lines that are on the fabric. If I happen to move this over a little bit, I'm hoping you can see that there's some double lines right here and up here and over here. If there's any double lines showing, your template is not lined up correctly. I've lined this up again. I see no drawn lines on the fabric. Everything is lined up because I have the spray based on the back of the template. It's not really slippery, so it's staying where I'm putting it. And now I'm ready to start quilting. I've pulled my quilting machine over so that the front edge of my hopping foot, which you probably can't see, is up against the edge of the template. I've pulled up my bobbin threads, I've secured it, and I've got a tail of thread right here. And to keep that from getting in the way, I'm just going to take that and I'm going to tuck that underneath an edge of that template. And then when I'm holding down on the template, I'm also holding down on that tail thread, and it's going to keep it out of the way. And it looks like my fingers might be in the way, but I have got to hold on to the template. I'm double checking my placement. My lines are all in position. I am now ready to start stitching. I'm going to continue my stitching across the top, and I'm going to stop when I'm over at the side edge of this block. I'm over at the right side edge, I want to bring my needle up and down 2 or 3 times to help secure my threads. Right now I'm going to leave my needle down and in the fabric so that the machine doesn't move. Now I'm going to lift the template and I'm going to bring it towards me. So this solid horizontal line, or actually any other solid horizontal line, is on one of the drawn lines that's on the fabric. And after I've checked my horizontals, now I'm looking at my verticals. I'm looking my way all the way across the template. I just have to straighten it out a hair. And once the template is in position, now I can lift my needle. I'm going to drag my machine towards me. I am not cutting my thread. I'm going to put my needle up and down a couple of times, and that helps lock the threads. I'm going to start quilting from this right side edge of the block over to the left side edge of the block, just like what I did on that first line of stitching. I'm over at my left edge of the block. Now I'm going to lift the template. I'm going to slide it towards me. So the next solid horizontal line on the template is lined up with the next solid horizontal line that's drawn on the fabric. Now I'm checking my verticals, and when everything is lined up, I'm going to lift my needle, drag my machine, needle up and down 2 or 3 times, and now I'm going to start stitching again from the left over to the right edge of the block. Now that I'm over at the right edge, I'm going to lift the template, bring it towards me. So the next solid horizontal line of the template is on the drawn horizontal line of the fabric, checking my verticals, and when everything is lined up, I'm going to lift my needle, drag my machine over to the edge of my template, needle up and down a couple of times, stitch over to the left edge. I am going to continue working that way from left to right, right to left, moving the template towards me, lining up the horizontal and vertical lines until I get all the way down to the bottom of the block. I'm going to do that off camera, and when I get that finished, I will show you what it looks like. I have all the horizontal curved edge stitching done on this block. On the top half of the block, I did the spacing of these curved lines so that they are 1 inch apart. On the bottom half of the block, I spaced the lines so they are actually only 1/2 inch apart. And with this template, it's really easy to do the 1/2 inch spacing. I have a close-up of the center line of the block and also the center line on the template. On the top half of the block, I lined up the solid lines of the template to the drawn lines that are on the fabric. To get that 1/2 inch spacing, you would line up the dashed line, and I'm going to move the dashed line down so it's on a drawn line on the fabric, which then gives you the 1/2 inch spacing. I have the camera off the tripod so that you can get a really good view of where your stitching line is. Here's the edge of the template. The stitching line is always going to be 1/4 inch away from the edge of the template because you have the width of your hopping foot that you have to deal with. Fortunately, this template compensates for the width of your hopping foot. I move the template down so that this straight line is on one of the drawn lines of the fabric. You can see the stitching line there. I've now moved the template down so that the dashed line of the template is on the solid drawn line. I've moved the template down so the solid line of the template is on a drawn line on the fabric. And there are 5 lines that are spaced 1/2 inch apart. And another view of the horizontal curved lines that I just quilted. But like they say on TV, but wait, there's more. We are now going to start doing vertical lines across the horizontal lines to make the curved cross hatching. I'm going to start quilting the vertical lines, lining up the template just exactly the same way I did when I did the horizontal lines, except that the template is now vertical instead of horizontal. And just like before, here's my line number 1, which is my center line of my template. I am lining it up to the center line that I drew on my fabric. Once that center line is in position along that horizontal line, now I'm going to look at my vertical lines, make sure those are lined up properly. I'm going to bring my machine over. I'm going to start at the top. I pulled up my bobbin thread, I've secured it, and I've tucked the tail underneath my template, and now I'm ready to start stitching from the top of the block all the way down to the bottom of the block. And when I get down to the bottom, I'm going to lift my template. I'm going to move it to the left, keeping the center line of my template on this drawn center line, lining up my horizontal and vertical lines. And I know you can't see it because of the way how I have the camera, but trust me, everything is all lined up. And when everything is all lined up, lift my needle, drag it over, needle up and down a couple of times, and then once everything is secure, I'm going to start stitching from the bottom to the top of the block. Now that I'm at the top of the block, just like what I've done before, lift the template, slide it over, line up the templates so the solid lines of the template are on the drawn lines of the fabric, and when everything is lined up, lift the needle, drag the machine, needle up and down 2 or 3 times, and then I'm going to stitch from the top to the bottom. I'm going to continue stitching that way from the right edge of the block to the left edge of the block. When I get to the middle, I'm going to then start doing my 1/2 inch cross hatching. It's exactly the same way that I did with the horizontal lines. When I get this block quilted, I'm going to show you what it looks like. I've completed the quilting in this block with both the horizontal and vertical curved lines. I know it might be a little hard to see because of all the drawn lines, but this stitched up really nice. And just like what I did in the horizontal stitching, the vertical lines in this half of the block are all stitched 1 inch apart. The vertical lines in this other half of the block are stitched 1/2 inch apart. Up here we have the traditional curved cross hatching with the 1 inch spacing. In this lower left corner, I have the traditional curved cross hatching with the 1/2 inch spacing. This upper left and lower right is a combination of both the 1/2 and the 1 inch cross hatching, which makes for some really unique designs. And here's this block after it has been washed and after the grid lines have been removed. Doesn't this look nice? Now we're going to move on to the next block. I'm in my next block and I've already started quilting a little bit of the curved crosshatch design. The difference from what I'm quilting now than what I did the last block is that the grid is on the diagonal. I started by drawing my double diagonal line through the middle. I put my grid on top of these lines, lined everything up, put the straight pins in to hold it, and then I drew my grid lines. Now I'm lining up my template exactly the same way that I did in the first block, except that I'm using the grids on the diagonal. The center line of my template, or line number 1 on the template, is lined up to my green middle diagonal line. The solid lines of the template are lined up to the drawn diagonal lines on the fabric. Once the template's in position, I move the machine into position. I secured my threads, and now I'm ready to start stitching. I have the camera set so you have a close-up view of what I'm doing, and just double checking everything is in position, and now I can start my stitching. And I finished my stitching at my left edge of my block. I'm going to lift the template, slide it towards me, so that again the solid lines on the template are on the drawn lines on the fabric, center lines to center line, and once everything is in position, lift my needle, drag my thread, needle up and down a time or two, and then I'm ready to start stitching. And just like we did before, lift the template, pull it towards you, line up the line center lines, diagonal solid lines, and then I'm ready to lift my needle up and down, and then I'm ready to start stitching my diagonal curved edge line. And you would work your way from the top of the block down to the bottom of the block. I prefer to work from the upper left to the lower right. As long as you're doing this on the diagonal, it makes no difference which corner you start in. I'm going to continue stitching like this off camera, and just like what I did on the last block, the top half I will continue with my 1-inch spacing. The bottom half of the block I will continue with the 1/2-inch spacing, and when I get this diagonal done, I will show you what I'm going to do next. I finished stitching my diagonal curved edge lines. From the middle line up is my 1-inch spacing. From this middle line down is the 1/2-inch spacing. I don't know if you can see it in this upper right corner. I have started stitching my diagonal lines going in the opposite direction. The template is positioned and the lines are quilted exactly the same way that I did on the first diagonal. The center line of the template is placed on that center drawn diagonal line. The solid lines of the template are placed on the drawn lines on the fabric. And then I would stitch from top edge to side edge and then move the template and go from side edge to the top edge, working my way from this upper right to the lower left. And when I get to this middle line, then I'm going to switch and start doing the 1/2-inch spacing. In this upper right corner, you can see some of the quilting that I've already done, and hopefully you're able to start seeing the pattern emerge. I'm going to continue quilting, and when I get this completed, I will show you what it looks like. I finished quilting this block, and this is looking so good, and some interesting things are happening, especially since I've been using the 1/2-inch and the 1-inch size of the curved cross hatching. Up here is where I have the traditional 1-inch cross hatching. Down in this section here is the traditional diagonal 1/2-inch curved cross hatching, and then over on this side and this side is a combination of the 1-inch and the 1/2-inch, and the directions that those curves are going influences what the quilted areas look like. And here's what this design looks like after this block has been washed and the marker has been removed. I want to show you one more design using the Longarm University curved cross hatching template. This design is on the diagonal just like the last one was, so you can see where I put my double diagonal lines to divide the block, put my stencil grid on top of that, lined everything up, put the straight pins in, drew the lines. For this design, everything radiates from the center. My first stitching line, I put my needle down right on this intersection, and then I position my template diagonal lines on the fabric along the drawn lines on the template, line number 1 center line to the center line, and I got that all lined up so that my stitching line was going to be right on that center point. And just like what I've done before, move the template away from the center, position all the lines, stitch my line, slide the template away from the center, position the template, stitch the lines. I'm now going to do the same thing. Coming back to the center, I will put my needle down right on that center intersection. Then I'm going to start lining up my template, line number 1 center line to the center line that's drawn on the fabric. The only difference is that when I stitch this, hopping foot's going to be in front of the template, so you're going to have to kind of reach behind the template to hold on to it. We're going to work our way from the center back out to the corner, just like I did here. Then I'm going to give the template a 1/4 turn, lining up the template by putting my needle down right in that center line, because when I stitch these lines, I don't want any of these lines overlapping in the center. I want them just barely kissing. And then lining up the lines of the template to the lines that are drawn on the fabric, working my way from the center out to the corner. And last but not least, we're going to give the template another 1/4 turn Again, starting in the center for positioning, lining up the lines on the template to the lines that are drawn on the fabric, stitching that center line, and then working my way into the corner just like what I have been doing. I've quilted my second quarter section starting from the middle and working my way to that upper left corner. And this pattern is really starting to develop. I'm going to continue my quilting and I will show you what this looks like when I'm finished. I've finished quilting this block and oh my goodness, I don't know if anybody was expecting that type of a design. I can surely imagine that behind some applique or some piecing. Really, it's not that hard to do once you get the grid lines established and you start lining up the lines of the template to the grid lines that are drawn on the fabric. Here is this block after it's been washed and all the grid lines have been removed. And doesn't that look nice? I've showed you 3 different things that you can do with your curved crosshatch template. I would encourage you to watch the free online, more detailed class on how to use the curved crosshatch template. There are many more designs, and I do go into detail on some of the fine-tuning of positioning and using the template and creating the designs. And always, if you have any questions about this template or any of the Longarm University templates, please feel free to send me an email and I am more than happy to answer any of your questions. And I hope you enjoy using your curved cross-hatching template.